Welcome back to the Historian's Tome, where history's greatest mysteries unfold in the gentle darkness. I'm your host, and tonight we sail into one of the ocean's most chilling tales. Before we begin our journey, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more mysteries that help you drift into peaceful sleep. I'm curious to know where you're watching from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you settling in for the night, or perhaps it's already the quiet hours where you are? Tonight, we explore the haunting mystery of the Ourang Medan, known as the Ship of Death. This ghostly vessel holds secrets that have puzzled maritime experts for decades. So dim your lights, get comfortable, and let the mystery wash over you like gentle waves as we uncover the truth behind this legendary ghost ship. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where endless blue meets the horizon, ships have always carried stories. Some carry cargo, some carry dreams, and some carry secrets too dark to imagine. The story of the Ourang Medan belongs to this last category, a tale that has haunted sailors and maritime historians for generations. It was a day like any other in the summer of 1947 when radio operators across the Pacific began picking up a distress signal. The message came in broken fragments, crackling through the static like whispers from another world. The voice on the radio spoke in Dutch, identifying the vessel as the Ourang Medan, a cargo ship sailing through the treacherous waters between Sumatra and Malaysia. The first message was simple enough, a standard distress call that radio operators heard far too often in these dangerous waters. All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. The message was clear, though disturbing. Ships faced many dangers in these waters, from sudden storms to mechanical failures. Perhaps the crew had succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning, a not uncommon fate for vessels with faulty ventilation systems. But then came the second message, and with it, a chill that would echo through maritime history. Possibly whole crew dead. The radio operator's voice carried a tremor now, something beyond simple mechanical failure. There was fear in those crackling words, a terror that transcended the normal dangers of life at sea. The listening posts along the coast strained to hear more. Radio operators leaned closer to their equipment, adjusting dials and frequencies, hoping for clearer reception. What they heard next would become one of the most spine-chilling distress calls in maritime history. "I die." The words came through the static like a final breath, followed by the unmistakable sound of Morse code. But this wasn't the crisp professional tapping of a trained radio operator. Instead, it was erratic, desperate, the kind of frantic signaling that spoke of panic and approaching doom. Then, silence. The radio waves that had carried the voice of the unknown crew member fell quiet, leaving only the endless static of the ocean's electromagnetic whispers. Across multiple listening posts, operators looked at each other with growing concern. Ships went silent for many reasons, but rarely did they do so after such disturbing final messages. The coordinates given in the distress call placed the Ourang Medan somewhere in the Strait of Malacca, one of the world's busiest and most dangerous shipping lanes. This narrow waterway between the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra had seen countless ships pass through its waters, carrying everything from spices to rubber, oil to manufactured goods. It was also known for sudden storms, treacherous currents, and more recently, the lingering tensions of a world still recovering from war. 2 ships in the area picked up the distress signal and immediately altered course to provide assistance. This was the unwritten law of the sea, a code as old as sailing itself. When a vessel called for help, others answered, regardless of nationality, cargo, or destination. The sea was enemy enough, without ships turning their backs on each other in times of crisis. The American merchant vessel Silver Star was closest to the reported position. Her captain, a seasoned mariner who had navigated these waters for over a decade, ordered his crew to prepare for a rescue operation. The ship's lookouts were doubled, scanning the horizon for any sign of the distressed vessel. In the engine room, stokers fed coal into the boilers with renewed urgency. pushing the ship to maximum speed through the increasingly choppy waters. As the Silver Star raced toward the coordinates, her radio operator continued monitoring the frequencies, hoping for additional information about the Ourang Medan's condition. But the airwaves remained silent, carrying only the usual chatter of commercial traffic and weather reports. It was as if the mysterious ship had simply vanished into the vast blue expanse of the Pacific. The crew of the Silver Star had no way of knowing that they were sailing toward one of the most disturbing maritime mysteries of the 20th century. They expected to find survivors clinging to lifeboats, perhaps a ship taking on water but still afloat, maybe even a vessel that had managed to resolve its emergency and was once again underway. What they would actually discover would challenge everything they thought they knew about the dangers that lurked in these ancient waters. As night began to fall over the Strait of Malacca, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the Silver Star's lookouts finally spotted something on the horizon. A ship sat motionless in the water, her silhouette dark against the dying light. There were no signals, no lights beyond the required navigation lamps, no signs of activity on her decks. She simply sat there like a ghost, waiting in the gathering darkness. The captain of the Silver Star ordered his ship to approach with caution. Something about the scene didn't feel right. In his years at sea, he had responded to many distress calls, and there was usually some sign of life, some indication of the emergency that had prompted the call for help. But the Ourang Medan showed no such signs. She appeared to be completely dead in the water, as lifeless as a tomb floating on the waves. Dawn broke slowly over the Pacific, painting the water in gentle shades of gold and blue. The Silver Star had maintained her position through the night, keeping the mysterious Ourang Medan in sight, while her crew prepared for what they hoped would be a straightforward rescue operation. As the first rays of sunlight illuminated the scene, the full extent of the mystery began to reveal itself. The Ourang Medan sat perfectly upright in the calm morning waters. Her hull showed no signs of damage, no listing that would indicate flooding, no scorch marks that might suggest fire. She appeared to be in perfect condition, as if she had simply stopped in the middle of her journey for no apparent reason. This was perhaps more unsettling than finding a ship that was clearly in distress. Captain Johnson of the Silver Star had seen many things in his 23 years at sea. He had witnessed ships broken by storms, vessels consumed by fire, and boats torn apart by the violent forces of nature. But he had never seen anything quite like this. The Ourang Medan looked like a ship that had simply been abandoned by her crew, left to drift alone in the vast expanse of the ocean. The captain ordered his crew to prepare a boarding party. Standard maritime protocol required that any abandoned vessel be thoroughly searched for survivors and investigated for potential hazards. The sea was no place for ghost ships, and every derelict vessel posed a potential threat to navigation. If the Ourang Medan was truly abandoned, she would need to be either towed to port or scuttled to prevent her from becoming a floating hazard. A boat was lowered into the calm morning waters, carrying 6 members of the Silver Star's crew. They were experienced sailors, men who had dealt with emergencies before and knew what to expect when boarding a ship in distress. They carried medical supplies, emergency rations, and basic tools that might be needed for repairs. What they did not carry was any preparation for what they were about to discover. As their small boat approached the Ourang Medan, the boarding party noticed the complete absence of any human activity. No faces appeared at the railings, no hands waved from the bridge, no voices called out in greeting or warning. The ship's deck was empty, her hatches closed, her machinery silent. Even the seabirds that usually followed ships in these waters seemed to avoid her. As if they sensed something wrong with this particular vessel, the boarding party secured their boat to the Ourang Medan's side and climbed aboard using rope ladders. The moment their feet touched the deck, they knew something was terribly wrong. The air itself seemed heavy, oppressive, in a way that had nothing to do with the tropical humidity. There was a smell too, faint but unmistakable. the kind of odor that experienced sailors associated with death. The first body they found was near the ship's bridge, slumped against a bulkhead, as if the man had simply sat down to rest and never gotten up again. But this was no peaceful death. The corpse's face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, eyes wide and staring at something only he could see. His mouth was open in what must have been a final scream, though no sound now emerged from those silent lips. The boarding party exchanged nervous glances. They had seen death at sea before, but this was different. There were no signs of violence, no wounds or injuries that might explain the man's demise. He simply appeared to have died of fright, as impossible as that seemed to rational minds. Still, they pressed on with their search, hoping to find survivors who might explain what had happened to this cursed vessel. They found the captain in his quarters, seated at his desk, as if he had been writing in the ship's log when death claimed him. Like the first body, his face bore the same expression of overwhelming terror. His pen was still clutched in his hand, though whatever he had been trying to write was illegible, just a series of frantic scratches across the page. The radio room yielded perhaps the most disturbing discovery of all. The radio operator sat slumped over his equipment, one hand still resting on the telegraph key. His final message, the desperate "I die" that had ended the Ourang Medan's distress calls, seemed to echo in the small space. But like the others, there were no signs of injury, no indication of what had killed him. One by one, the boarding party discovered more bodies throughout the ship. The crew had died at their posts, in their bunks, in the corridors where they had been walking when death struck. Every face bore the same expression of terror, as if they had all seen something so horrifying that it had literally scared them to death. Even the ship's dog was found dead, its lips pulled back in what looked like a snarl of fear. The cargo hold presented its own mystery. The Ourang Medan had been carrying a standard load of general merchandise, nothing unusual or dangerous by maritime standards. There were crates of manufactured goods, barrels of various liquids, and sacks of raw materials bound for ports throughout Southeast Asia. Nothing that should have posed any threat to the crew, nothing that could explain the wholesale death that had claimed every soul aboard. Yet even here, in the depths of the ship, the boarding party felt that same oppressive atmosphere, as if the very air was thick with malevolent presence. Several of the men reported feeling watched, though they found no living thing larger than the rats that scurried away from their flashlight beams. Others mentioned a sensation of cold, despite the tropical heat that should have made the ship's interior stifling. As the search continued, one member of the boarding party made a discovery that would add another layer to the growing mystery. In a locked cabin that appeared to have been used for storage, he found several wooden crates marked with symbols he didn't recognize. The markings were not in any language the sailors could identify, though they had the look of military or government codes. When pried open, the crates revealed their contents to be ordinary-looking chemical containers, each carefully sealed and labeled in what appeared to be German. The discovery of German chemicals aboard a Dutch ship in 1947 was significant. The world was still coming to terms with the horrors of the recently ended war, and stories of secret weapons and experimental substances were common in the newspapers of the day. Could the Ourang Medan have been carrying some kind of experimental cargo that had accidentally killed her crew? But even this potential explanation raised more questions than it answered. If the chemicals had leaked or somehow been released, why were there no signs of chemical burns or poisoning? Why did every crew member look as if they had died of fright rather than toxic exposure? And why did the ship's instruments show no readings that would indicate the presence of dangerous gases? The boarding party spent several hours searching the Ourang Medan from bow to stern, looking for any clue that might explain the mass death of her crew. They found a ship in perfect working order, with no mechanical problems, no structural damage, and no obvious source of danger. Yet every human being aboard had died in apparent terror, leaving behind only questions and the growing certainty that something truly inexplicable had occurred in these waters. As the sun climbed higher in the tropical sky, the boarding party from the Silver Star made their final sweep of the Ourang Medan. The heat was becoming oppressive, but it wasn't just the temperature that made the men uncomfortable. There was something else, a growing sense that they were not alone on this ship of death, despite having found no living soul aboard. The decision was made to attempt to tow the mysterious vessel back to port. Whatever had happened aboard the Ourang Medan, maritime law required that the incident be properly investigated. The dead crew deserved proper burial, and the authorities needed to examine the evidence to determine what had caused such a catastrophic loss of life. Perhaps forensic experts could discover what the boarding party had missed. Preparations began for the towing operation. Heavy cables were brought aboard the Ourang Medan and secured to her strongest points. The Silver Star's crew worked efficiently, though many cast nervous glances at the silent bodies that still lay where they had been found. No one wanted to spend more time than necessary on this floating tomb, but duty demanded that they complete their task. It was during these preparations that the first signs of new trouble began to manifest. Several crew members reported that the air below decks was becoming increasingly difficult to breathe. The oppressive feeling that had plagued the boarding party seemed to be growing stronger, as if whatever had killed the original crew was awakening once again. One sailor, a veteran of many rescue operations, came running up from the cargo hold with his face pale and his hands shaking. He reported that the temperature in the lower decks was rising rapidly, though there were no signs of fire and the ship's cooling systems appeared to be functioning normally. More disturbing still, he claimed to have heard sounds from deep within the ship, sounds that couldn't be explained by normal creaking or settling. The captain of the Silver Star was faced with a difficult decision. The Ourang Medan represented a significant maritime mystery, and towing her to port could provide valuable answers. But the safety of his own crew had to come first, and the reports from below decks suggested that whatever had killed the original crew might still be active. As if to underscore this concern, wisps of smoke began to emerge from the Ourang Medan's ventilation systems. At first it was barely visible, just faint tendrils that might have been explained by engine heat or cooking fires. But within minutes, the smoke had thickened and darkened, carrying with it a smell that none of the experienced sailors could identify. The captain ordered an immediate evacuation of the Ourang Medan. His crew needed no encouragement to abandon the mysterious vessel and return to the safety of their own ship. As they rowed away from the ghostly freighter, the smoke continued to pour from her vents and hatches. Though still no flames were visible, what happened next would become the most debated aspect of the entire Ourang Medan mystery. According to the official reports filed by the Silver Star's crew, the mysterious ship suddenly erupted in flames so intense and sudden that they seemed to come from within the very structure of the vessel itself. There was no gradual spread of fire. No time for anyone to have saved her, even if they had been so inclined. One moment she was smoking, the next she was a floating inferno. The explosion, when it came, was unlike anything the experienced sailors had ever witnessed. Instead of the sharp crack of exploding fuel or ammunition, there was a deep, resonant boom that seemed to come from somewhere far below the surface. The blast wave struck the Silver Star with enough force to knock several crew members off their feet. Though they were already a safe distance away, but perhaps most disturbing of all was what several witnesses reported seeing just before the explosion. They claimed that the smoke rising from the Ourang Medan had formed strange shapes against the tropical sky, patterns that looked almost like faces twisted in agony or symbols from some unknown language. Though such reports were likely the product of overwrought imaginations, they added another layer of mystery to an already inexplicable event. The fire that consumed the Ourang Medan burned with colors that shouldn't exist in ordinary flames. Witnesses describe blues and greens mixed with the expected oranges and reds, as if the very materials of the ship were composed of substances unknown to normal maritime construction. The intensity of the heat could be felt even at a distance, far greater than would be expected from burning wood and metal. Within 30 minutes, the ship that had been perfectly intact was completely consumed. She slipped beneath the waves with barely a trace, leaving only a few pieces of floating debris and an oil slick that quickly dispersed in the tropical currents. It was as if the ocean itself was eager to erase all evidence of what had occurred. The crew of the Silver Star watched in stunned silence as the last remnants of the mysterious vessel disappeared beneath the surface. They had come to perform a routine rescue operation and had instead witnessed something that challenged their understanding of the natural world. The official report would describe mechanical failure and fire, but every man who was there knew they had seen something far more inexplicable. In the days that followed, several crew members would report strange dreams and waking visions. They described seeing the faces of the dead crew members, still frozen in expressions of terror, calling out warnings in languages they couldn't understand. Others reported a persistent sensation of being watched, as if the spirits of the Ourang Medan were still somehow present. The captain of the Silver Star filed his report with maritime authorities in both Singapore and Jakarta, providing as accurate an account as possible of what they had witnessed. But even in his official documentation, he struggled to find words that could adequately describe the inexplicable events they had encountered. How do you report that a ship and her entire crew died of fright? How do you explain flames that burned in impossible colors or smoke that formed shapes against the sky? The chemical containers that had been discovered in the locked cabin added another dimension to the mystery. Some maritime experts suggested that the Ourang Medan might have been carrying experimental substances developed during the war, perhaps even early chemical weapons that had somehow leaked or been accidentally activated. This would explain the rapid death of the crew and possibly even the unusual fire that had consumed the ship. But this theory, like all others, had significant problems. Chemical weapons of the era would have left clear signs of their use, from physical symptoms on the victims to residual traces that could be detected by investigators. The crew of the Ourang Medan showed no such signs, appearing instead to have died of pure terror rather than toxic exposure. In the weeks following the destruction of the Ourang Medan, maritime authorities throughout Southeast Asia launched an extensive investigation into the mysterious incident. The story had captured the imagination of newspapers around the world, with headlines speculating about everything from secret weapons to supernatural causes. But beneath the sensational coverage, serious investigators were working to uncover the truth behind one of the ocean's most baffling mysteries. The first challenge facing investigators was the complete lack of physical evidence. The Ourang Medan had been utterly destroyed by the mysterious fire, leaving behind no debris that could be analyzed for clues about what had killed her crew. The few pieces of wreckage that had been recovered by the Silver Star were too small and too damaged to provide meaningful information. Authorities began by trying to verify the most basic facts about the ship itself. They searched shipping registries throughout the Dutch East Indies, looking for any record of a vessel named Ourang Medan. The name itself was curious, as Ourang Medan meant man of Medan in Malay, referring to the large city on the Indonesian island of Sumatra. But no official documentation could be found for any ship bearing this name. This absence of records was particularly puzzling given the extensive bureaucracy of maritime registration. Every commercial vessel was required to be documented with multiple agencies, from port authorities to insurance companies. Ships needed registration papers, inspection certificates, crew manifests, and cargo documentation. Yet the Ourang Medan appeared to exist in none of these official records. Investigators expanded their search to include vessels that might have been operating under false names or without proper documentation. The years immediately following World War II were chaotic times in Southeast Asia, with many ships changing hands, being renamed, or operating outside normal legal channels. Perhaps the Ourang Medan was actually a vessel with a different official name, possibly even a former military ship that had been converted to civilian use. The search led them to examine records from the Japanese occupation, when many Dutch vessels had been seized and repurposed for military use. Some of these ships had never been properly returned to civilian registries, creating a grey area where vessels might operate without clear legal status. But even these more questionable records yielded no mention of the mysterious freighter. Attention then turned to the crew of the Silver Star, the only witnesses to the Ourang Medan's final moments. Each crew member was interviewed extensively, their accounts compared and cross-referenced for any details that might have been missed in the initial reports. While their stories remained consistent about the basic facts of what they had witnessed, some interesting discrepancies emerged in the smaller details. Several crew members mentioned strange sounds they had heard while aboard the mystery ship, sounds that hadn't been included in the official reports. These ranged from what one sailor described as whispering voices, coming from empty rooms, to mechanical noises that seemed to have no source. Others reported feeling sudden temperature changes in various parts of the ship, areas that would become uncomfortably cold despite the tropical heat. Most intriguingly, 3 separate witnesses mentioned seeing what they described as unusual markings or symbols carved into various surfaces aboard the Ourang Medan. These weren't part of any normal ship's equipment or decoration, but appeared to be deliberately inscribed into metal surfaces. The symbols resembled no known alphabet or writing system, leading some investigators to wonder if they might be related to the mysterious chemical containers that had been discovered. The chemical containers themselves became a major focus of the investigation. Based on the descriptions provided by the boarding party, experts attempted to identify what substances the Ourang Medan might have been carrying. The German markings on the containers suggested a possible connection to wartime research, perhaps even to the advanced chemical and biological weapons programs that had been discovered in the ruins of Nazi Germany. This line of investigation led authorities to examine captured German documents related to experimental weapons development. During the final years of the war, German scientists had been working on numerous projects that pushed the boundaries of conventional warfare. Some of these involved chemicals that could induce psychological effects, from extreme fear to complete paralysis. Could the Ourang Medan have been carrying samples of such substances? The timing seemed to support this theory. In 1947, the world was still discovering the full extent of German wartime research. Allied forces were systematically investigating every aspect of Nazi scientific development, and many captured materials were being transported to various locations for study. It was entirely possible that the Ourang Medan had been carrying such materials when disaster struck, but even this promising lead eventually reached dead ends. Records of German chemical weapons research made no mention of substances that could cause the specific type of death witnessed aboard the mystery ship. While German scientists had indeed developed chemicals that could cause fear and panic, these typically required direct exposure through breathing or skin contact, and would have left clear physical evidence of their effects. Investigators also examined the possibility that the Ourang Medan had been the victim of some kind of attack, either by pirates or by military forces. The waters around the Strait of Malacca had always been dangerous, and the post-war period had seen an increase in maritime crime as various groups competed for control of shipping lanes. Perhaps the crew had been killed by attackers, who had then set fire to the ship to destroy evidence. This theory required that the attackers had used some unknown weapon or method that could kill an entire crew without leaving obvious signs of violence. While this seemed unlikely, investigators noted that the war had produced many new and terrible weapons, some of which might not yet be fully understood by civilian authorities. The rapid development of chemical and biological weapons during the conflict had created possibilities that were only beginning to be explored. Interviews with other ships that had been in the area at the time of the incident provided little additional information. Several vessels reported having received the same distress signals that had prompted the Silver Star's rescue attempt, but none had been close enough to observe the actual events. A Norwegian freighter reported seeing smoke on the horizon around the time the Ourang Medan was said to have burned. But the distance was too great to provide useful details. As the investigation continued, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Several other incidents in the same general area shared troubling similarities to the Ourang Medan case. In the months before and after the mystery ship's destruction, there had been reports of vessels found abandoned with no explanation for the crew's disappearance. While none of these cases involved the mass death witnessed aboard the Ourang Medan, they suggested that something unusual was happening in these waters. One particularly relevant case involved a small fishing boat found drifting empty off the coast of Sumatra. Just 3 weeks before the Ourang Medan incident, the boat was in perfect condition, with no signs of storm damage or mechanical problems, but her crew of 5 men had simply vanished. Their fishing equipment was still deployed, and their personal belongings remained untouched, as if they had simply stepped off the boat and disappeared into the ocean. As months passed without any definitive answers, the mystery of the Ourang Medan began to attract attention from researchers and theorists far beyond the maritime community. The case had all the elements that captured public imagination: unexplained death, possible government secrets, and the vast mystery of the ocean itself. Each new theory brought its own perspective to the puzzle. Though none could fully explain all the strange details of the incident, the most widely accepted theory among maritime professionals was that the Ourang Medan had been carrying some type of experimental chemical cargo that had leaked or been accidentally released. This explanation could account for the rapid death of the entire crew and possibly even the unusual fire that had consumed the ship. Proponents of this theory pointed to the German-labeled containers found by the boarding party as evidence of dangerous experimental substances. Chemical weapons experts noted that the post-war period had seen extensive experimentation with new types of warfare agents. Both the Allied and Axis powers had developed substances designed to incapacitate rather than kill, including chemicals that could induce extreme psychological states. Perhaps the Ourang Medan had been carrying samples of such weapons when something went wrong, causing the cargo to be released throughout the ship. This theory gained additional support when researchers discovered that several ships in the immediate post-war period had been used to transport captured German scientific materials to various Allied research facilities. The Dutch government, like others, had been involved in studying German wartime innovations, and it was possible that the Ourang Medan had been part of this secretive program. However, the chemical cargo theory struggled to explain some key aspects of the case. The crew members found aboard the ship showed no physical signs of chemical exposure, no burns, discoloration, or other symptoms typically associated with toxic substances. Their expressions of terror suggested psychological rather than physical causes of death, which would require a very specific and unusual type of chemical agent. A second major theory focused on the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning. This colorless, odorless gas was a known killer on ships, particularly those with poorly maintained engine rooms or heating systems. Carbon monoxide could indeed kill an entire crew quickly and without obvious physical symptoms, and it was entirely possible that a mechanical failure had led to the gas spreading throughout the ship. Maritime safety experts noted that carbon monoxide poisoning could explain the peaceful appearance of many of the bodies. as victims often simply lost consciousness and died without apparent struggle. The gas was particularly dangerous because it could accumulate to lethal levels without anyone realizing the danger until it was too late. But the carbon monoxide theory also had significant problems. The expressions of terror seen on the faces of the crew were not typical of carbon monoxide deaths, which usually appeared peaceful. Additionally, carbon monoxide would not explain the unusual fire that had consumed the ship, unless there had been some additional factor that caused the blaze. A third theory emerged from the world of paranormal research. Investigators noted that the Strait of Malacca had long been associated with supernatural occurrences in local folklore. Fishermen and sailors from the region had passed down stories for generations about ghost ships, sea spirits, and areas of ocean where strange things happened to those who ventured too far from shore. According to these local legends, certain areas of water were cursed or haunted, places where the boundary between the world of the living and the dead became thin. Ships that entered these areas might encounter spirits of those who had died at sea, beings that could drive men mad with terror or steal their souls entirely. Could the Ourang Medan have encountered something supernatural that modern science couldn't explain? While most serious investigators dismissed supernatural explanations, some noted that the crew's expressions of terror were remarkably consistent with descriptions of people who claimed to have encountered ghostly apparitions. The absence of any physical cause of death also fit with folklore. Descriptions of people who had been literally scared to death by supernatural encounters. A more modern paranormal theory suggested that the Ourang Medan might have encountered some type of psychic phenomenon, perhaps related to the strong emotions and violent deaths that had occurred in these waters during World War II. The region had seen intense naval combat, with thousands of sailors dying in battles between Japanese and Allied forces. Some researchers theorized that such concentrated emotional trauma might leave psychic imprints that could affect sensitive individuals. From a completely different angle, some investigators began to question whether the Ourang Medan had ever existed at all. The complete absence of official records for the ship was highly unusual, and some researchers suggested that the entire incident might have been an elaborate hoax or cover story for some other event. This conspiracy theory gained traction when researchers noted discrepancies in various newspaper accounts of the incident. Some reports described the ship as Dutch, others as German, and still others suggested it might have been operating under false papers. The variations in these details suggested that information about the case might have been deliberately obscured or manipulated. Proponents of the hoax theory suggested that the Ourang Medan incident might have been created to cover up a genuine maritime disaster involving classified cargo. Perhaps a real ship carrying secret materials had been lost, and the story of the mystery vessel was created to deflect attention from whatever had actually happened. This would explain both the lack of official records and the unusual secrecy that seemed to surround the case. However, the hoax theory struggled to account for the detailed testimonies of the Silver Star's crew. These were experienced sailors with reputations to protect, and it seemed unlikely that they would have participated in an elaborate deception. Their accounts were consistent and detailed, suggesting that they had indeed witnessed something extraordinary. Even if the true nature of that event remained unclear, Abigus' related theory suggested that the Ourang Medan had been involved in some type of illegal or classified operation that required its existence to be hidden from official records. The post-war period had seen extensive black market activity in Southeast Asia, with various groups smuggling everything from weapons to precious metals through the region's shipping lanes. Perhaps the Ourang Medan had been operating as part of this shadow economy, carrying cargo that couldn't be officially documented. When disaster struck, the authorities might have chosen to suppress information about the ship's true identity and mission rather than reveal details about classified or illegal activities. This theory could explain both the lack of official records and the apparent reluctance of authorities to pursue the investigation too vigorously. If the ship had been involved in sensitive government operations, there would have been strong incentives to limit public knowledge about what had actually happened. As researchers continued to investigate the case, they uncovered additional reports of similar incidents in various parts of the world. Ships found abandoned with no explanation for their crew's fate, vessels that caught fire under mysterious circumstances, and maritime disasters that seemed to defy conventional explanation. These cases suggested that the Ourang Medan might not have been unique, but rather part of a larger pattern of unexplained maritime phenomena. The ocean has always been humanity's greatest mystery, a vast expanse that covers most of our planet, yet remains largely unexplored and poorly understood. As investigators delved deeper into the Ourang Medan case, they discovered that history was filled with similar maritime mysteries, ships that had met inexplicable fates in waters around the world. These parallel cases provided both context and additional puzzles for researchers trying to understand what had happened in the Strait of Malacca. One of the most famous comparable cases was that of the Mary Celeste, discovered drifting unmanned in the Atlantic Ocean in 1872. Like the Ourang Medan, the Mary Celeste was found in perfect condition, with no signs of violence or struggle. Yet her entire crew had vanished without explanation. The ship's cargo was intact, her navigational instruments were functional, and there was no indication of what might have prompted the crew to abandon their vessel. The Mary Celeste mystery had generated countless theories over the decades, from mutiny to piracy to supernatural intervention, but none had ever been definitively proven. The case demonstrated that unexplained maritime disappearances were not unique to the post-war period or to Southeast Asian waters, but represented a recurring phenomenon that had puzzled investigators for generations. In 1948, just 1 year after the Ourang Medan incident, another mysterious case occurred in the same general region. The SS Samki, a British cargo vessel, was found drifting abandoned off the coast of Malaysia, with her engines still running and her cargo hold partially flooded. The crew of 19 men had vanished completely, leaving behind no trace of what had happened to them. What made the SS Samki case particularly relevant to the Ourang Medan mystery was the condition in which the ship was found. Like the earlier incident, there were no signs of violence or struggle aboard the vessel. The crew's personal belongings remained untouched. Meals were still on tables in the galley, and the ship's money box had not been disturbed. It was as if the entire crew had simply decided to leave the ship simultaneously, though there was no lifeboat missing and no evidence that they had been rescued by another vessel. The SS Samki incident received much less attention than the Ourang Medan case, partly because no dramatic fire had marked its conclusion, and partly because authorities were becoming reluctant to publicize maritime mysteries that might damage confidence in shipping. But investigators who studied both cases noted remarkable similarities in the unexplained nature of the crew disappearances and the perfect condition of the abandoned vessels. Another relevant case had occurred in 1940 during the height of World War II, when the German cargo ship MV Joyita was found drifting empty in Pacific waters. The ship showed signs of recent occupation, with warm food still in the galley and navigation equipment that had been used within the previous few hours. Yet her crew of 25 men had vanished without leaving any message or indication of distress. The MV Joyita case was initially attributed to enemy action, as wartime conditions made it possible that the crew had been captured or killed by opposing military forces. However, post-war investigations revealed no evidence of military involvement, and the mystery of the crew's disappearance remained unsolved. The pattern of unexplained maritime incidents extended beyond individual ship disappearances to include entire areas of ocean that seemed to be associated with unusual phenomena The Strait of Malacca itself had a long history of strange occurrences that predated the Ourang Medan by centuries. Local fishermen spoke of areas where compasses spun wildly, where the water itself seemed to behave differently, and where boats would sometimes be found empty and drifting with no explanation for their crew's fate. These local accounts were often dismissed by colonial authorities as superstition, but they shared common elements that suggested some underlying reality to the stories. Fishermen described encountering banks of fog that appeared suddenly on clear days, bringing with them strange sounds and sensations that filled men with inexplicable dread. Others spoke of lights beneath the water that seemed to follow their boats, glowing with colors that didn't match any known sea life. During the Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia, military records documented several incidents involving naval vessels that experienced unexplained equipment failures and crew behavioral problems in certain areas of the strait. Japanese commanders attributed these incidents to Allied sabotage or psychological warfare, but no evidence of enemy involvement was ever found. Instead, the reports described crews becoming increasingly agitated and fearful while passing through specific coordinates, with some sailors claiming to see apparitions or hear voices that no one else could detect. American submarine crews operating in the region during the latter part of the war reported similar experiences. Several submarines logged incidents where crew members became violently ill or exhibited signs of extreme anxiety while submerged in certain areas, even when there was no indication of enemy presence or mechanical problems. These incidents were classified at the time and only came to light years later during routine declassification of wartime documents. One particularly well-documented case involved the Dutch merchant vessel Tome, which disappeared in 1945 while traveling the same route later taken by the Ourang Medan. The ship was found 3 days after her disappearance, drifting in circles with her engines still running, but no crew aboard. Unlike the Ourang Medan, no bodies were found on the Tome, but investigators discovered that all the ship's clocks had stopped at exactly the same time, and the magnetic compass was spinning freely as if unable to find magnetic north. The Tome incident was initially classified as a wartime casualty, with authorities assuming that the crew had been taken prisoner or killed by Japanese forces. However, the ship's cargo was completely untouched, and there were no signs of boarding or conflict. Most puzzling of all, the ship's radio had been left in working condition, yet no distress calls had been transmitted. Despite the crew's apparent ability to send for help. Research into historical maritime records revealed that unexplained ship abandonments had been occurring in the Strait of Malacca for hundreds of years. Portuguese explorers in the 16th century wrote of finding vessels drifting empty with their crews vanished, attributing these incidents to sea monsters or divine punishment for entering forbidden waters. Dutch colonial records from the 17th and 18th centuries contained similar accounts, though these were often buried in administrative reports and given little official attention. One common element in many of these historical cases was the condition of the abandoned ships. Like the Ourang Medan and similar modern incidents, the vessels were typically found in good repair with no signs of storm damage, fire, or violence. The crews simply seemed to have vanished, often leaving behind personal belongings and evidence that they had been going about their normal duties when whatever happened occurred. The geographic concentration of these incidents was also significant. While unexplained maritime disappearances occurred in waters around the world, there seemed to be certain areas where they happened with unusual frequency. The Strait of Malacca was one such area, but researchers identified similar patterns in other regions. Known for heavy shipping traffic and unusual oceanographic conditions, the Sargasso Sea in the Atlantic Ocean had long been associated with mysterious ship disappearances, though these were often attributed to the unusual seaweed formations and calm conditions that could trap sailing vessels. However, even in the age of steam and diesel power, the region continued to produce unexplained incidents involving ships found abandoned or crews that reported strange experiences while passing through the area. Similarly, certain areas of the Pacific Ocean, particularly in the waters between Southeast Asia and Australia, seem to be associated with an unusually high number of maritime mysteries. Ships would report equipment malfunctions, crew behavioral problems, and sightings of unexplained phenomena while traveling through these regions. While most vessels passed through without incident, the frequency of strange reports was statistically significant enough to attract the attention of maritime safety investigators. The phenomenon wasn't limited to large commercial vessels. Small fishing boats, military patrol craft, and private yachts also reported unusual experiences in these areas. The consistency of reports across different types of vessels and crews suggested that whatever was causing these incidents was not specific to particular kinds of ships or cargo. Attempts to explain these patterns led researchers to examine various environmental factors that might contribute to maritime mysteries. Unusual magnetic fields, underwater geological activity, and atmospheric conditions were all investigated as potential causes. Some areas with high frequencies of unexplained incidents were found to have unusual oceanographic features, including underwater volcanic activity and magnetic anomalies that could affect navigation equipment. However, environmental explanations struggled to account for the human element in these mysteries. While magnetic anomalies might cause compass problems and geological activity might create unusual sea conditions, these factors couldn't easily explain why entire crews would abandon perfectly functional ships or die from apparent terror, as had occurred aboard the Ourang Medan. More than 70 years have passed since the Ourang Medan sent her final terrifying distress call across the waters of the Pacific. In all that time, despite extensive investigation and countless theories, the mystery of what killed her crew and destroyed the ship remains unsolved. The case has become one of maritime history's most enduring puzzles, a story that continues to fascinate researchers and capture the imagination of anyone who has ever wondered what secrets the ocean might hold. The lack of physical evidence has made it impossible to reach definitive conclusions about what happened aboard the mysterious vessel. The ship's complete destruction by fire eliminated any chance of forensic analysis that might have revealed the cause of her crew's death. All that remains are the testimonies of those who witnessed the aftermath, and their accounts raise more questions than they answer. Modern maritime safety experts have applied contemporary knowledge to the case, using advanced understanding of chemical hazards, psychological phenomena, and oceanographic conditions to evaluate the various theories. While several explanations remain plausible, none can account for all the observed facts. The rapid death of the entire crew, their expressions of terror, and the unusual fire that consumed the ship form a combination that defies easy explanation. The chemical cargo theory continues to be favored by many investigators, particularly given the discovery of German-labeled containers aboard the ship. The post-war period saw extensive transportation of captured Axis scientific materials, and it's entirely possible that the Ourang Medan was carrying experimental substances that accidentally killed her crew. Modern knowledge of chemical weapons includes agents that can cause rapid death and extreme psychological distress, which could explain the crew's apparent terror. However, chemical experts note that even the most advanced substances available in 1947 would have left more obvious physical evidence than was reported by the boarding party. The absence of burns, discoloration, or other typical signs of chemical exposure remains difficult to explain under this theory. Additionally, the unusual fire that destroyed the ship doesn't match typical patterns for chemical combustion, unless multiple different substances were somehow involved. The carbon monoxide poisoning theory offers a more conventional explanation that could account for the rapid death of the crew. Modern safety protocols have made such incidents much rarer, but carbon monoxide remains a serious hazard on ships with internal combustion engines and heating systems. The gas could potentially kill an entire crew before anyone realized the danger, particularly if the ship's ventilation systems were compromised. Yet this explanation also has significant weaknesses. Carbon monoxide typically produces a peaceful death, with victims losing consciousness gradually rather than dying in apparent terror. The expressions seen on the Ourang Medan's crew were more consistent with extreme psychological distress than with gas poisoning. Furthermore, carbon monoxide wouldn't explain the mysterious fire unless there was an additional mechanical failure that caused combustible gases to ignite. Psychological explanations have gained more credibility as understanding of mass hysteria and group psychology has advanced. Modern research has documented cases where entire groups of people have experienced similar psychological symptoms simultaneously, particularly in high-stress environments like ships at sea. It's possible that something triggered a mass psychological event aboard the Ourang Medan, causing the crew to experience fatal levels of stress and panic. This theory could explain the expressions of terror seen on the crew members, as well as the apparent absence of physical causes of death. Extreme psychological distress can indeed be fatal under certain circumstances, particularly for individuals with underlying health conditions. If the crew experienced simultaneous panic attacks or psychological breaks, it might have resulted in the scene discovered by the boarding party. However, psychological explanations struggle with the question of what could have triggered such a dramatic group response. While mass hysteria is a documented phenomenon, it typically requires some initial stimulus that affects susceptible individuals who then influence others through social contagion. The Ourang Medan case would require an external trigger powerful enough to affect the entire crew simultaneously, which seems unlikely under normal circumstances. The supernatural theories, while generally dismissed by serious investigators, continue to intrigue those who believe that science hasn't yet explained all the phenomena that exist in our world. The Strait of Malacca's long history of unexplained maritime incidents provides context for claims that certain areas of ocean might be subject to forces beyond current scientific understanding. Proponents of paranormal explanations point to the consistency of witness accounts across centuries of maritime activity in the region. They argue that the concentration of unexplained incidents in specific geographic areas suggests environmental factors that mainstream science has yet to identify or accept. While such theories remain speculative, they reflect genuine attempts to account for patterns that conventional explanations have difficulty addressing. The possibility that the entire Ourang Medan incident was a hoax or cover-up has been thoroughly investigated by modern researchers. Computer analysis of historical records, cross-referencing of maritime documents, and detailed examination of witness testimonies have all been applied to determine whether the case might have been fabricated or deliberately obscured, while some inconsistencies have been found in various newspaper accounts and official reports. The core elements of the story remain consistent across multiple independent sources. The crew of the Silver Star had no apparent motive for creating an elaborate hoax, and their professional reputations would have been damaged by participation in such a deception. Most researchers now conclude that something genuinely unusual did occur, even if the exact nature of that event remains unclear. The emergence of similar cases from around the world has provided additional context for understanding the Ourang Medan mystery. The fact that comparable incidents have been documented in different regions and time periods suggests that whatever happened to the mystery ship wasn't entirely unique. Instead, it may represent an extreme example of phenomena that occur occasionally in maritime environments under specific but poorly understood circumstances. Modern satellite tracking Improved communications and better maritime safety protocols have made incidents like the Ourang Medan much less likely to occur unobserved or unresolved. Today's ships carry multiple communication systems, automatic location beacons, and various monitoring devices that would make it nearly impossible for a vessel to simply disappear without leaving extensive electronic records of its final moments. Yet, even with all these technological advances, the ocean continues to produce mysteries. Ships still disappear under unexplained circumstances. Crews still report unusual phenomena in certain areas, and maritime investigators continue to encounter cases that don't fit neatly into conventional explanations. The vastness and relative inaccessibility of the ocean means that it retains its capacity to surprise and confuse even in our modern age of advanced technology. The Ourang Medan case has become more than just a maritime mystery. It represents humanity's ongoing struggle to understand the natural world and our place within it. The story touches on themes of exploration, danger, and the limits of knowledge that resonate with anyone who has ever wondered what lies beyond the horizon or beneath the waves. For those who work at sea, the story serves as a reminder of the ocean's continuing power to surprise and challenge human understanding. Despite centuries of maritime experience and decades of scientific oceanography, the sea retains much of its mystery. Ships still encounter conditions and phenomena that can't be easily explained, and sailors continue to report experiences that stretch the boundaries of conventional understanding. Despite extensive investigation by qualified experts using the best available methods and technologies, some questions simply cannot be answered definitively. The Ourang Medan reminds us that there are limits to human knowledge, and that some secrets may never be fully revealed. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of vast ocean horizons and mysterious ships sailing through moonlit waters. The sea holds countless stories, some recorded in official logs and others whispered only in sailors' tales. The Ourang Medan has taken her place among these maritime legends, a ghost ship that continues to sail through our imagination long after her physical form was consumed by flames and claimed by the depths. The mystery endures, as enduring as the ocean itself, waiting in the vast blue expanse for someone who might finally uncover the truth about what happened on that fateful day in 1947. Until then, the Ourang Medan remains what she became in her final moments. A ship of death, carrying secrets too dark for the living world to comprehend, sailing eternal waters in the realm between mystery and memory. Rest well, and may your dreams be filled with calmer seas and gentler mysteries than those that claimed the crew of the Ourang Medan. The ocean keeps its secrets, but it also offers peace to those who respect its vastness and power. Sleep now, as the waves continue their endless dance across the surface of our blue planet, carrying stories both told and untold toward distant shores.